Welcome to the art class.
Picture this. For 500 years, millions of people have walked into the Sistine Chapel, leaned their heads back, and stared up at the exact same image.
Right, the creation of Adam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's arguably the most famous, most reproduced painting in human history. You've got God on the right, reaching out toward Adam on the left, and there's just that tiny, famous, fingers width of air between them.
Yeah, everyone knows that image.
Right. Now, the standard story that you get from the tour guides, the history books, centuries of theological tradition, it's that this is the moment of creation. God is giving Adam the gift of life. He's bestowing a soul, breathing existence into the first man.
That's what we've all been taught.
But what if millions of people and like 5 centuries of the world's most brilliant art historians were all looking at the entirely wrong gift?
It is a staggering thought to consider. I mean, the idea that the defining image of the Western world might contain a secret message, one that completely upends the traditional narrative of the Renaissance, the Catholic Church, and one of history's greatest artists.
It's wild.
It really is. The truth, hiding in plain sight in that fresco, forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about that ceiling.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore a fascinating stack of sources, including peer-reviewed medical journals like JAMA and Neurosurgery, that prove Michelangelo hid perfect, highly accurate anatomical cross-sections of the human brain right inside the Pope's private chapel.
Yeah, we're going to explore the mechanics of how he pulled off this massive visual deception, and maybe more importantly, why he risked his own life to put those images there.
Exactly. But before we get into the how, let's talk about the who.
Right. The context of who actually cracked this code is vital, because it wasn't the art historians or the theologians.
Not at all.
They stared at the ceiling for half a millennium and saw exactly what their training conditioned them to see, masterful brushstrokes and biblical narratives. It took the entirely different perspective of modern medical doctors walking in and looking up at that platter to finally decode the ultimate theological subversion.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the way this 500-year-old illusion was finally broken is it's basically a masterclass in seeing the unseen.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to jump from the 1500s all the way to 1990. There's an American obstetrician from Indiana named Frank Lynn Meshberger. And he isn't even in the Sistine Chapel. He's simply looking at a reproduction of the creation of Adam.
Just a standard print.
Yeah. And he notices that the giant billowing red cloak surrounding God and the angels isn't just a dramatic piece of fabric blowing in the celestial wind.
Right. Meshberger experienced this moment of sudden, undeniable recognition. As a physician with years of intensive medical training, the specific shape, the folds, the contours of that red cloak, they matched an internal structure he knew intimately.
He literally saw biology in the art.
Exactly. He took his neuroanatomy textbooks and placed the medical diagrams directly next to the image of the fresco. And he didn't take his findings to an art history publication.
If they probably wouldn't have listened.
Probably not. So he submitted his paper directly to the Journal of the American Medical Association, making the argument that this was not a matter of artistic interpretation, but of pure, verifiable human anatomy.
And the visual mapping he demonstrates is incredibly precise. The red cloak isn't just, like, rakely brain-shaped. It is a flawless, sagittal cross-section of a human brain.
Right.
Meaning, if you took a human head and sliced it directly down the middle from front to back, opening it up like a book, this is exactly the complex landscape you would see.
It's unbelievable.
The upper billowing curve of the cloak mirrors the exact structure of the cerebrum. There's a trailing lower section of the fabric where an angel is positioned that maps identically to the brainstem. Meshberger even points out a specific figure in the lower left of the cloak, sitting in the exact anatomical location where the pituitary gland belongs.
Yeah, the structural alignments are just too numerous to be brushed off as coincidence, and it gets even more granular.
Oh, the scarf.
Yeah.
I love this part.
Yes. You have this green scarf hanging down from the bottom of the entire composition. For hundreds of years, art historians cataloged that specific green scarf as mere decorative flair. Just a flourish.
But Meshberger looks at that same green scarf and immediately identifies it, because the vertebral artery has a very distinct, twisting, almost ribbon-like path as it travels up the spinal column and connects to the base of the brain.
Right, it's a very specific biological shape.
And Michelangelo paints this green scarf with an unnatural coiled twist, that perfectly mimics the exact trajectory and anatomical shape of that specific artery, anchoring it right where it would meet the brainstem.
It's brilliant.
It is. It's like sneaking a highly classified scientific blueprint into a child's coloring book and hoping someone 500 years later knows how to read the lines.
Which brings us to the profound theological implication of what Meshberger actually uncovered.
Yeah, what does it actually mean?
Well, by visually encapsulating the creator entirely within the physical structure of the human mind, the standard interpretation of the painting fractures. God isn't simply handing Adam a soul or the literal breath of life. God is endowing Adam with an intellect.
Oh, wow.
He is giving him reason, consciousness, and the supreme capacity for thought.
That is heavy. But, if Meshberger is correct, and that is a flawless cross-section of a human brain, we are faced with a massive historical paradox.
How did he know what it looked like?
Exactly. You don't just guess what the inside of a skull looks like. You can't observe the path of the vertebral artery by looking at a muscular model posing in a studio. Which means we have to address how a 16th century painter possessed neuroanatomy knowledge that rivaled 20th century medical textbooks.
We have to delve into Michelangelo's incredibly dark subterranean past.
Like a true crime story suddenly.
It really is. To understand the biological reality of that painting, we have to look at the physical reality of the artist. Michelangelo, born a rowdy, began his anatomical education at the age of 17 by bribing his way into a church graveyard at night.
At 17?
17. Specifically, the graveyard of the Santo Spirito in Florence. Under the cover of total darkness, he was illegally exhuming and dissecting corpses.
So he's 17 years old, standing in a dark graveyard by candlelight with a scalpel, physically dismantling bodies.
Yeah, he struck an illicit arrangement with the prior of Santo Spirito, who looked the other way and provided the space in exchange for occasional gifts and artwork.
Just a little quid pro quo for some fresh cadavers.
Exactly. And this was not a passing morbid curiosity. Michelangelo dissected human cadavers in secret for 20 grueling years.
20 years.
Yes. And you have to remember the context of the 1500s. The Catholic Church strictly condemned human dissection. It was considered blasphemy. The Church believed in the literal bodily resurrection, meaning cutting open a cadaver was a desecration of the sacred vessel God had made, and it jeopardized the soul's afterlife.
And if he had been caught hacking into skulls to study brain tissue, that would have been the end of his career and, very likely his execution.
Absolutely.
That sheer level of danger makes his subsequent actions entirely logical. He deliberately destroyed almost all of his anatomical notes and dissection sketches.
He had to.
Right. He wanted to completely erase the paper trail of this massive, decades-long crime. Now, historians have always known he must have done deep dissections, because you look at the flawless musculature of sculptures like the David or the Pietà.
They're anatomically perfect.
Yeah, you can't carve the complex interlocking tension of tendons and muscles from the outside in. You have to know how the machine operates from the inside out. But the physical evidence, the drawings of the internal organs and the brain stems, went into the fire.
He burned his life's scientific work because the physical evidence was a literal death sentence.
So I have to push back on the logic of his final move here.
Okay, go ahead.
If the danger was so severe that he was terrified enough to burn his own private, irreplaceable notes, why on earth would he take that exact same forbidden knowledge and paint it 50 feet across the ceiling of the Pope's own chapel?
This seems crazy, right?
Yeah, it feels like setting yourself on fire on purpose. Why put the evidence of your crime above the altar?
What's fascinating here is how Michelangelo's personal faith evolved and radicalized over his life. While he began as a traditional Catholic, he later became deeply involved with a movement called spiritualism.
Okay, spiritualism.
Yeah, this group held specific beliefs that the church viewed as highly dangerous. Spiritualists believed that the human body, and specifically the human brain, was a divine, sacred object.
Interesting.
Even more radically, they argued that human beings could commune with God directly through their own minds and internal intellect.
Oh, so that theology completely removes the need for a priest to act as a bridge to the divine.
Exactly. It renders the entire institutional structure of the church as an unnecessary intermediary. Spiritualism suggested that God wasn't housed in an external cathedral, but was housed internally within human consciousness.
That is a massive theological shift.
So Michelangelo isn't painting an anatomy lesson to show off his medical prowess. He is risking his life to paint his deepest, most heretical theological conviction.
And he didn't just hide this conviction in one panel. To prove that the brain and the creation of Adam wasn't just some bizarre one in a billion artistic coincidence, We have to look chronologically at the very last piece of the ceiling Michelangelo painted.
Right, the final panel.
It's a panel called the separation of light from darkness.
This specific fresco is where the anatomical evidence becomes impossible to ignore. In 2010, two neuroanatomists from Johns Hopkins University, Ian Sook and Rafael Tamargo, published a comprehensive paper in the journal Neurosurgery.
Another medical journal getting involved.
Exactly. They spent years analyzing this final panel, which holds the most prominent real estate in the entire room. It is positioned directly above the most sacred spot in the Sistine Chapel, the altar.
The exact location where the Pope stands to conduct Mass.
Right over his head.
The analysis Sook and Tamargo present is remarkable. They found a second, even more complex anatomical structure hidden directly in the image of God's neck and throat. It is a highly accurate, quote-unquote, bottom-up view of the human brainstem, the spinal cord, and the optic nerves.
And we have to emphasize, a bottom-up view is an incredibly unusual, highly technical angle.
How so?
Well, if you dissect a human brain from the top down, the brainstem is entirely obscured by the cerebrum. To observe the specific overlapping shapes that Michelangelo painted, looking up the brainstem from the perspective of the spinal cord, you have to carefully remove the entire brain from the skull intact, flip it over, and study it from the base.
Oh, wow.
That requires advanced surgical precision.
It absolutely does. And the way he disguised that surgical knowledge is a stroke of pure genius. I love this detail.
Yeah, the lighting.
For centuries, art historians cataloged the lighting on God's neck in this specific panel as a puzzling technical error.
Just a mistake.
Right. On every other panel across the massive ceiling, Michelangelo is a master of consistent lighting. The light source comes from the bottom left, and the shadows fall naturally. But on God's neck, in the separation of light from darkness, the shadows are entirely wrong.
They don't make sense physically.
They violently clash with the established physics of the rest of the fresco. It's like a Hollywood lighting director setting up all the spotlights to shine from the left, but then artificially painting shadows on the lead actor's face, as if the light was coming from below.
And art historians just assume the great master simply got tired or made a sloppy mistake on his final panel.
Which is pretty insulting to Michelangelo, honestly.
It is. The neuroanatomist proved he deliberately painted the physics of light incorrectly to force the viewer's eye to see the hidden brainstem. You need those specific, inaccurate, jarring shadows to create the artificial depth required to outline the complex cylindrical shapes of the spinal cord and the brainstem on a flat surface.
And to make that visual illusion work, he adds another detail that art historians had filed away as just an artistic oddity.
The beard.
God's beard in this panel is inexplicably short, and it curls upward, unnaturally defying gravity.
Yeah, it rolls up the chin specifically to expose the throat and the hidden anatomy beneath it. Nothing on that ceiling is a mistake. The broken lighting physics and the unnatural hair were meticulously engineered to reveal the anatomy to anyone who actually knew how to look at it.
So we have a man who spent 20 years conducting illegal secret dissections in a graveyard, methodically encoding perfect neuroanatomy into the plaster.
And the overarching message and the immediate physical danger of who he was painting this for cannot be overstated. Pope Julius II was the patron who commissioned this work. He was a powerful, volatile figure.
Yeah, Julius II was known as the warrior pope. This is not a man you want to cross or subtly insult. And yet, for 4 years, while Michelangelo was painting, and for years after, Julius would walk into that chapel, stand at the altar, and stare up at the ceiling.
Michelangelo placed a direct theological attack, a visual manifesto, stating that intelligence is the divine gift, and the Pope himself is an unnecessary middleman directly above the Pope's head.
The sheer brilliance of his survival strategy was that he encrypted this treasonous message in the language of dissection.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Michelangelo knew perfectly well that the Pope, the cardinals, and the priests strictly adhered to the ban on autopsies. They completely lacked the biological vocabulary to read the image. The church officials couldn't see the brainstem because they had literally never seen a real one.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the church's censorship eventually did catch up with Michelangelo, just entirely in the wrong way.
Oh, right. Years later.
Yeah, years later, he returns to the same chapel to paint another massive fresco, The Last Judgment. Pope Paul IV takes one look at it and absolutely hates it.
Because of all the nudity, right?
Exactly. He condemns the masterpiece as pornographic simply because it features hundreds of nude figures. The church is so scandalized by standard human bodies that they literally hire another artist who history dubbed the breeches maker, to paint fig leaves and loincloths over the nudes.
The breeches maker. That is such an embarrassing title.
They even suspended Michelangelo's pension, and he ended his career under intense church censure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the irony is just staggering.
It really is. The church successfully censored simple human nudity, feeling incredibly morally superior while remaining entirely blind to the massive, heretical, anatomically perfect human brain floating right over their altar for 5 centuries.
That historical irony reveals something profound about how Michelangelo navigated the perilous world of Renaissance Rome. He effectively weaponized his own secret knowledge against the institution that threatened him.
That's a great way to put it.
He used the church's own enforced dogmatic ignorance of science as the very shield that protected his art. The institutional blindness of the church was the only thing that kept him safe from execution.
So we know he successfully hid these structures in 2 highly prominent panels. But Michelangelo spent 4 grueling years on his back, painting 343 individual figures up there.
It's a massive amount of art.
If he went through the immense trouble of hiding a highly technical bottom-up view of the brainstem directly over the altar, it defies logic to think he stopped there.
Which leads us to ask, what else are we missing?
That is the real frontier of this discussion. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is a massive, sprawling data set. As of right now, modern medicine has deeply analyzed only 2 of those panels.
Just 2.
Frank Lynn Meshberger spent years decoding one. Ian Sook and Rafael Tamargo spent years decoding another. There are hundreds of figures left unexamined by medical professionals. And, the scientific community is already starting to comb through them. There was a 2016 paper published in the journal Clinical Anatomy by a group of Brazilian researchers.
Oh yes, that one made some waves.
It did. They put forward a highly controversial argument that female anatomical structures, specifically represented by downward-pointing triangles, ram skulls, and specific spatial arrangements, are hidden throughout the ceiling's compositions.
As symbols of sacred femininity.
Exactly, and the physical origins of humanity. Now, as our sources clearly note, this paper is hotly debated and not universally accepted by any means. We're not saying it's definitive, but it cracks the door open to the sheer scale of the puzzle.
Whether you accept the specific findings of that 2016 paper or not, the underlying premise it operates on is undeniable. We are dealing with a man who possessed deep, tactile knowledge of human anatomy, who encoded radical theology into biological structures, and we have only successfully decoded a fraction of his workspace.
So what does this all mean? For 500 years, the greatest art historians in the world looked at this ceiling and they saw masterful art. The greatest theologians in the world looked at it and saw divine theology. It literally took obstetricians and neuroanatomists to look up at the exact same shapes and see the biology.
This raises an important question about how we restrict our own understanding of the world today. We live in an era where knowledge is highly siloed.
Very true.
The doctors stay in the hospitals reading medical journals, the art historians stay in the museums curating exhibits, and the theologians stay in the seminaries. But Michelangelo didn't silo his genius.
He was doing all of it.
He was simultaneously a master artist, a rogue anatomist, an engineer, and a radical theologian. If you only bring one lens to his work, you are guaranteed to miss the actual masterpiece.
It is an incredible journey. A 17-year-old grave-robbing dissector takes the most dangerous, illicit secret of his life, and instead of taking it to his grave, he paints it 30 feet above the Pope's altar.
A permanent record.
Yeah. He leaves behind this silent, brilliant argument spanning centuries that the human mind, our reason, our intellect, our capacity for complex thought, is the true sacred home of the divine. So, the next time you look at something you have seen 100 times, whether it's a famous painting, a historical document, or even a stubborn problem in your own life, assume you're looking at it with the wrong eyes. Ask yourself what someone from a totally different discipline, a totally different background, might see that you are entirely blind to.
That's a great takeaway. And as you consider how many different lenses you can apply to the world around you, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think back to the tragic historical reality that Michelangelo systematically destroyed all his private anatomical dissection notes to avoid being executed by the church.
Right, the burn sketches.
We have spent centuries in both the art and science worlds mourning the fact that those physical, brilliant sketches are permanently lost to history. But what if they aren't lost at all? What if the Sistine Chapel ceiling isn't just a magnificent religious painting? What if it is the very anatomical textbook he supposedly burned, brilliantly republished on wet plaster, right where the church would fiercely protect it for eternity?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.